Well, here we are in 2022, and this is the first podcast of the new year in the month named after the two-faced god that looked both backwards and forwards. So we're going to do that with Retrospective 2 that touches on some of the themes from last year and complements Retrospective 1 from October and looks forward now to 2022. I'd like to begin by giving a shout out to my donors, this time to Parthena Draggett. Thank you, Parthena Draggett, for providing a donation to help this podcast continue. As a wonderful educator, author, and consultant, Parthena has changed lives all over the country. Thank you for being a podcast guest. Thank you for donating, Parthena. And thank all of you for listening today. Hi, I'm Norah Jones. Welcome to It's About Language. So, what is language all about? Well, it's about learning and sharing, opening doors in education, work, and life. Language is about creating communities and creating boundaries. It's all about the mystery of what makes us human. So, our conversations will explore that mystery and the impact of what makes us human. It's about language in life. It's about language at work. It's about language for fun. Welcome to the podcast. Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to It's About Language 2022. Thanks for listening to this episode and any others that you might have since I started the podcast back in September of 2020. Had amazing guests, and I hope that you have had a chance to listen to Retrospective 1, which I put out in October of last year, 2021, in which we took a look at how language affects the identity, the sense of belonging, and the sense of positive, powerful impact in the world. In 2022, we're going to be taking a look at language in three kinds of directions. The language as we are living it every day as those who are teaching, those who are learning, those who are in careers, those who are traveling, language in life. We're going to be taking a look also at language and what it means for business. How does it attract, retain, encourage, engage employees? What kind of impact does it have on the target of the business or organization? And finally, we're going to take a look at language as fun. Language is amazing. It's a game we play as well as a tool that we use, uniquely human. So we're going to start 2022 with a retrospective that launches us forward. My first guest in this retrospective is from episode 18, Lisa Four. Lisa Four's episode called Common Bond demonstrates that for Lisa, her heart is always open to who she is and how she understands herself as part of the human community. But Lisa's background would not have indicated this sense of the multilingual and multicultural person, educator, leader that she has become. Listen to this excerpt from episode 18, Common Bond, with my fellow Virginian and friend Lisa Four, and see how it relates to your understanding of your background and yourself with regard to language.
I went to a school from kindergarten until the end of my sophomore year that I saw no cultural diversity. There were no people of color. We all looked alike. Most of us were from farm families or parents who were in manufacturing, maybe a few educators, but basically our histories were very similar. I think it was a long time before I actually had the real opportunity to grow. I had never really traveled out of the 5-state area, Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina, Kentucky, West Virginia, until I was 28 years old. I'd never been on a plane. I'd never dreamed of traveling anywhere. I'd read books and watched movies, and I was suddenly given the opportunity to travel to Germany through the Rotary Group Study Exchange. I was very naive. I was very innocent. um, especially within my experiences. And we were told as a team that everyone that we would come into contact with in Germany would speak English and that we didn't have to worry about knowing German. And now looking back on that, I realized what an arrogant viewpoint that was and how inconsiderate and rude it was to assume that I was going to someone else's country, to their home, and expecting them to accommodate me with my language. Living in the area that I live in, not all of the schools in our district are affluent. And so, sometimes students don't get the opportunities to travel. And unfortunately, sometimes I don't get to take as many students as I would like to with me. But definitely, I felt like it was my responsibility, not just within my school that already had a strong travel program when I first began working there, but to make sure that that travel program continued, that someone gave me the opportunity to travel, changed my life. And although the school trips, through travel companies, they see a lot of the tourist places and things like that, I'm still hoping it'll touch their heart in some way, that they'll actually want to go back and spend time either in college or sometime later in their life and actually immerse themselves in the culture somehow as an individual. So I'm hoping to spark something there.
Language and culture as spark. Isn't that powerful? Who has sparked you? Do your own retrospective along with this one about the podcasts. Here's another spark. Here's another powerful story about that we learn from others dear in our lives. Focus in close. Isn't it interesting? We're going to be taking a look at the sparks in the life of Linda Egnatz. Linda Egnatz is episode 7. She talks about that which sparked her life, her inspiration, and connected her even more strongly with the world as an educator and as a person who wanted to make sure that stereotypes were overcome. Listen to this excerpt from Linda Egnatz, episode 7, about what sparked her excitement, her joy, and her love. Who's the spark in your life?
So many wonderful faces come to mind, and they have impacted me as much as maybe I have impacted or opened any doors for them. One example has to be our daughter. We have an adopted daughter from who we adopted at age 10 from Guatemala. She is a bilateral amputee. She lost both of her arms as a young child. And she came to us actually as a Shriners Hospital kid. We were a foster family for her as she got prosthetic arms so that she would be able to do the things that kids regularly do, read and write and tie their shoes. As an adult, she's going to be 40 this year. She no longer uses her prosthetics, but she has worked in the Indianapolis public school districts as a bilingual aide and empowers children who, like her, have come to the United States and had to learn a language as an older child and adopt new cultures and new school systems. And seeing what she was able to do, and she did it more on her own than I supported her, I'm sure, but to see her then enable other students and children to do the same has been remarkable. And I think of all of the students, as a language teacher, I had the unique opportunity to to travel as a Spanish teacher with students abroad. And I chose intentionally to go to countries back and forth. I did Spain, but I also did many countries in Latin America so that students wouldn't get a stereotype of what is a Spanish speaker. And one of those young ladies who actually went 3 years on tours with me, is now at the University of Florida. So she's currently in the Dominican Republic working with an NGO on her time when she's not in class. And what an amazing story. And she just said, the world is an open place we can serve. And I didn't tell her that. But I think when you open the door to a bigger place, and we do that through language, we do that through culture, and we do that through just exposing someone to a new experience. You just don't ever know where that's going to go and how many other lives will be impacted because we took that step. Language is so much more than grammar and vocabulary.
Language is so much more than grammar and vocabulary. For those of you in the listening audience that are educators of language, you're aware of this. We're understanding that the direction in which language education has been going and is especially focused in now in a world of need, that it's the use of the language, not the study of it per se. Language as a tool is what we look for, rather than language as a topic. So let's take a look at what that means from the point of view of how we empower others. If you're an educator, how we empower students. If we're out there using language in the world, how can we help others to feel even more empowered in their lives? It's not about vocabulary and grammar. What's the magic? Let's listen to Linda Markley. Linda Markley is episode 2. She provides an insight into how advocacy from the heart changes the way people feel about language and its impact in their lives and what they can do. Take a listen and see, what is it that you have found that goes down to the essence of what's important to you and to those you love and serve?
I started with myself because I wanted to create a different experience for students who would then become ambassadors for world languages. So I would go to cocktail parties or, social events, and people would say, "What do you do for a living?" I'd say, "I'm a teacher." And they'd say, "Oh, what do you teach?" And I'd say, "Languages." And they'd go, "Oh." And then kind of the war stories would start. Hopefully people weren't twitching too much as they were talking about their experiences with languages. And what I got a lot of was, too much grammar, too much memorization. I took 100 years of Spanish or French or German, and I don't know how to say anything. And that just kind of broke my heart, because to me, learning a language opens up your world, and you want to connect with other people and communicate with them and connect to their heart. It's a huge open door to the world. And I wanted to provide that for my students. So I looked to my own personal experiences and said, I want something kind of better for my students. I want them to have meaningful, personalized experiences with language. I had surveys. I've 30 something years of surveys from the very beginning of the year and every 9 weeks after that till the end of the year, getting input from students. What did you find to be helpful? What did you like? What didn't you like? What do you think you can do with the language? What would you like to do with the language? And I would develop my lesson plans from there.
What can you do? How does language have an impact on yourself? I established this podcast in 2020 because I wanted to treat you to conversations with interesting and caring people on the fascinating role of language in our lives. I hope you're enjoying it and will share it with others. And I hope what you're hearing is helping you find your voice and your superpower through language. One more item. I'm covering podcast production costs on my own, and a donation and support would be greatly appreciated. If you can donate, please visit my website at fluency.consulting. You'll find lots more language topics there too. That's fluency.consulting. Thank you so much. You know, one of the things about my own personal background is that language didn't really mean anything to me when I was younger. But then when I realized that part of my identity was that of a daughter of a refugee immigrant from Croatia, there was a language there, there was a culture there, there was a family there, there was an identity there. Then I began to take a look at language as a living, breathing thing. I feel very grateful that I did because, as I mentioned earlier, I came at languages from an anthropological point of view rather than from a study of language. Language study came from my desire to learn more about myself and about how humans think. And therein lies a really important insight from the excerpt that I'm going to share with you next. L.J. Randolph, episode 15, from the University of North Carolina at Wilmington, has as his topic language and social justice. And this conversation with L.J. Randolph was fascinating from start to finish, opening my eyes and my sensitivities to things as we talked, as you'll hear again if you listen to episode 15. LJ brings in here perspective that has to do with both commonalities and different perspectives of the world. Those kinds of perspectives that lead to social justice action or lack thereof, the very kinds of things that we're looking at now with the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations that are happening at all levels of our society. L.J. Randolph goes into what happens when we bring those perspectives. Sometimes we don't even recognize where those perspectives have come from. As you'll hear in this excerpt, this fascinating moment where L.J. describes his own background and its impact on his perspective and bringing that to his students.
I'm in Wilmington, North Carolina, and this was the place of the 1898 Wilmington race riots, the coup d'etat in Wilmington, um, against the Black population. And I'm from Wilmington. I went to schools in this area. I didn't go to school in Wilmington because by the time I was like in middle school and high school, I was living in a small town that was right outside of Wilmington called Riegelwood. But I didn't learn about the Wilmington race riots until I was teaching high school in Chapel Hill. So this would have been after my undergraduate and my master's degree. And I just thought it was interesting because moving back here and seeing Wilmington through the eyes of an adult versus through the eyes of a child and adolescent, I just thought, wow, how much more would I have understood about the context of where I lived, some of my own experiences with racism. How much more would I have been able to understand and unpack that if I was able to examine this when I was during my K through 12 schooling. And so I think about that perspective now as I'm teaching my own students. I'm always thinking about what's going on in our own neighborhoods, our own communities. What am I thinking about? What are our students thinking about? And how can I incorporate that into the classroom in a way that promotes their language proficiency, in a way that supports their development in the language, right? And so I try to, at the lesson planning, unit planning, course development level, think about what are some essential questions that would allow me to discuss and incorporate some of these critical topics in a seamless way within the curriculum. And then I look, I try to find resources that reflect that. I'm very intentional about selecting resources from marginalized communities, from minoritized communities. I'm looking at how our communities overlap and how we interpret the same situation, the same experiences differently based on our own identities and our own perspectives, even though we are within the same community.
Marginalized communities. Isn't it interesting? We can take a look at any number of directions to go when we think about marginalized communities, ones that are forefront in the social justice area, and also those that are not necessarily in the midst of the front line of our understanding, but are marginalized. As a matter of fact, their invisibility and their lack of voice is something that we actually have to become aware of even more. Now, one of the aspects about language in life and language, what it means for business, is to make sure that we recognize the power of reaching out to marginalized communities, being able to understand the language, prompt the language, grow the language even as we connect. Connection is going to make the identity and the belonging grow in positive directions, something that all of our cultures need all the time, but especially in challenging times. That's an important aspect of why this podcast is happening, so that we can talk about the language that we use and apply. So, the next excerpt that I'd like to share with you is from Akash Patel. His episode number 21, Connecting the World to the Classroom. As you listen to this excerpt of this dynamic man who has founded the Happy World Foundation, and as you have a chance, I hope, to review or to listen for the first time to his episode 21, you'll see a person who was touched strongly in his own identity and in recognizing that he was in front of a marginalized community as well, one that did not understand the international joy, impact, and importance of language and culture. Listen to this excerpt and listen how he succinctly summarizes how he started from that understanding to making a huge impact in the lives of students all around the country and world.
I saw the children and I saw a gap in global education. I saw that a lot of these kids had never left their farming communities. And they didn't know necessarily where Dubai or Mumbai or Johannesburg was on a map.
Yeah.
I, on the other hand, had the privilege to have traveled to over 50 countries, speak 6 languages. So I was like, what can I do to bridge this gap? Because as one human, I can only do so much. But what if I bring in all of my contacts from Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, from all of these different countries, and video call them using Facebook video calling, WhatsApp, Skype, Google Hangout, because back then in 2014, we didn't have Zoom. I mean, maybe we had it, but it wasn't as popular as it is during COVID-19 times.
Yeah.
So I mobilized this group of volunteers and created a small database that could video call my rural classrooms in Oklahoma. And then I realized, what if I shared this gift with teachers from all across the state of Oklahoma? And then slowly, what if I shared this gift with teachers from all across the United States? And that's what we do today. Today, we have a database of over 1,000 John Lennons. I call them John Lennons because they do this for free.
And you just kept leveraging your friendships, your connections.
And the friends of friends of friends, because these friends have other connections. So they'll lead you to a giant network. And every time we facilitate a video call, the pictures from those calls help inspire action in folks who are like, oh, I think I could do this too.
Okay, now we've talked big picture things. There's a lot of emotions in the various excerpts that I've provided so far. Haven't they been fascinating? Here's the last excerpt for today in this retrospective is that from Sherry Spain Long, Executive Director of the American Association of Teachers of Spanish and Portuguese, the AATSP. Her episode is episode 19, and it's called Multiplier Effect. And there lies the magic of, well, her episode in particular here, but of all the episodes we've been talking about with the nature of language. Let's get down to the implications of what it means, how it happens, what concretely we do. Listen to this excerpt from Sherry Spain Long, Multiplier Effect, episode 19. Take a look at how specifically we can make sure that we empower the identity, the belonging, and the potential impact of all those around us to make sure that we have the most powerful, positive work for the world.
You really see this drive toward credentialing that includes a component of assessment as a way of, as you put it, back channeling or offering a different entry point and end point for students who may be from disadvantaged backgrounds, who are at schools where, and this happens all the time, you've got really great heritage language speakers of Spanish. And guess what? They've taken every single Spanish course in the curriculum, and there's nothing left for them to take. And which is a shame, because even though you think, well, yeah, they speak Spanish, but this level of literacy that you have to get at to be able to really work with technical Spanish or literary Spanish or scientific Spanish or whatever, it's something that has to be continually developed. This back channeling of the credentialing is really nice, because it's a way that you can show that you've got multi-literacies and you're multilingual with a credential that is recognized and respected because it's externally vetted. And this is a way that it helps level the playing field for a number of students who have been kind of left out of the system because they maybe weren't the candidate or the right person to be sitting in a Spanish 1 and 2 class in a high school that doesn't offer anything else. And so there are these wonderful credentials that even sort of include this idea of language maintenance, which is very interesting too, so that it can be used professionally and on a continuum in a way. It makes you think about languages as not just course completion. And I think that's a big pivot for a lot of Americans, to be thinking about language learning as not just a bunch of years sitting in a chair in an institution somewhere in the United States of America that may or may not have an outcome that is useful.
So that's the truth. Language is not just a bunch of years sitting in a chair. One of the aspects of It's About Language for 2022 is to make sure that you and all those that you point to this podcast will be able to be energized, understanding that the tool of language is in their lives and can create a huge difference in a sense of well-being for themselves, for their community, and for the world. Because in language, we are going to find your life superpower. It's going to be through language, because that's how people work. And it's going to be about the language that you use about yourself and the words and meanings you share with others. That's what we're going to do in 2022. We're going to have a lot of fun with language and see the power in your life. Those practical applications that I love to provide in my workshops and talks that have to do with what I like to call practical language magic. It is magic. Let's do the magic together. Let's find what your superpower is, find out what our cultural, linguistic, human superpower is, and let's have a lot of fun. Thanks so much for listening to this retrospective, and I look forward to welcoming you and having a chance to talk with you in the next podcast. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast episode today. Please leave a review for me or share your thoughts on social media or on my website, fluency.consulting. And thanks again for considering a donation to keep the podcast going. I appreciate it. I look forward to our next time together.